going to present on the Worker Co-op Index, and I've abbreviated a much longer presentation. So normally I start by actually giving a fair bit of theoretical background about where the index came from. And it's really around the notion of total participation in terms of employment, ownership, and management. And so basically the thrust that the index came from was identifying worker co-ops as probably the sort of ideal organization in which participation, ownership, and responsibility actually get played out, because the business is owned and operated by the employees within the enterprise. And so that's kind of the genesis of really looking at total participation management. Yes. So the purpose, I have to look at this screen because this screen's too small for me. The purpose is basically to help measure the degree of adherence to the co-op principles and values. So it's really, what we're trying to do is saying within a worker co-op, in particular, since it's a day-to-day activity, we really make sure that all of our activities in the worker co-op, from the way we treat one another in terms of management, governance, employees with one another, customers, suppliers, all of that needs to embody the co-op values and principles, and that needs to be at the heart of all of our kind of operational governance kind of vision of what a worker co-op is. Help to maintain our identity as cooperatives in terms of our strategy as firms. So again, recognizing that as a worker co-op, yes, we're providing goods and services in the community, but we really need to see how this identity and purpose that we have from a practical kind of market perspective also relates very directly to our cooperative identity and how we maintain those values within that identity in terms of our vision of what we're doing. The tool is also designed to help us measure our success in terms of actually achieving that identity. So some sense of are we really progressing in terms of living out, as we say, walk the talk? Are we really doing that? And then lastly, it actually provides some guidance through the assessment process of ways that we can improve both on the governance and the operations side of our cooperatives. The report is based on a questionnaire that goes out to all members and employees. So in worker co-ops, often you have a mix between member employees and non-member employees. So there's often a transition period where employees come in before they become members. So the questionnaire is actually designed for all participants in the cooperative. There's about 173 questions, and basically one of the fundamental premises of this approach is that the perceptions of the employees and the members is the foundation of the way they interact with the co-op. So if I perceive the co-op to be trustworthy, then I'm going to act in a different way. If I perceive my colleagues to be trusting and reliable, I'm going to act in a different way. If I perceive that we're innovative, I'm going to react in a different way. So the questions really are about the members and the employees' perception of multiple facets within the organization. And out of those, we then have basically created a number of indexes that were basically subgroups of the questions. And so we have a maturity index, which basically, out of the 173 questions, we identified what were the key questions we thought every worker co-op, regardless of what sort of organizational structure they had, what sort of business enterprise they were engaged in, should actually have high scores in these particular areas. So we made that into a maturity index, which basically gives you a kind of a quick snapshot of where your cooperative is as towards an ideal worker cooperative. The Organizational Trust Index, again, looks at what level of trust there is within the cooperative in terms of the openness to revealing things about yourself in terms of your perception and your discussion, which will affect, again, the way you're interacting with folks. And then we have both the index for the co-op values and for the co-op principles. Again, series of questions that relates very specifically to the values and the principles. So these little index are just a snapshot that, again, in the report's about 170 pages long. So elements of the report we tried to kind of summarize and give kind of a quick snapshot so you don't have to, you can get some kind of indicator of where you are. So you can see in terms of the data that was used to produce this, the co-op is actually an immature co-op. That does not mean in time, it means actually in structure and operation. So this co-op might have been around for 15 years, but because of the response to the answers, it's a strong indication that there's real weaknesses in terms of the way this co-op is operating as it relates to the co-op values and the co-op principles. So again, just indexes, just quick samples there. So the next part of the report basically provides a general picture, and besides the co-op values and the co-op principles and the overall index, there's basically 30 different organization dimensions that the report produces information on. And they're divided into 4 basic categories. So organizational systems, and that would include things like, you know, systems of communication, the transparency within management and governance, feedback systems, how people actually learn and get response to what they're engaging in, development of the members, pay scales, innovation, personnel policy. So a whole series that relates kind of the organizational structure. The next one is the organizational climate, which really relates to how the people within the co-op are relating to one another. So the levels of trust, respect, the competence of leadership, what kind of management style, how much participation is occurring within that, the relations between the workers, and of course, do people actually enjoy going to work? Are they having some fun in terms of the activity of what they're carrying out? Then there's the personal attitudes and actions, which really looks at your individual participation. So, you know, your personal ownership, a sense of knowledge of what's going on, your responsibility for your activities, your capacity to involve and make process improvements, so that real capacity to make a difference within that context. And then a whole series of outcomes, both individual, organizational, and social. So we're looking at the co-op. The co-ops are there to meet the needs of their members, so individual outcomes are very important, but also are the organizational outcomes. A good cooperative, good worker co-op can only meet its members' needs if it's organizationally sound and is operating well. And then, of course, needing to also meet the needs of the community if we're going to have a sustainable society and actually benefit all participants, not just the owners of the cooperative. So these answers in terms of the questionnaire is that they're based on the positive responses, and we actually do 2 levels. We do a broad positive response criteria and a narrow one, just because it helps with the analysis. So I'm just going to give you a very quick example. We do a detailed analysis for each one of the principles, each one of the values, and each one of those organizational dimensions. We have a graph that's produced through the report, which again identifies all of the questions that were asked, the positive answers, the negative answers, and null answers, which would be either I don't want to answer, or I don't understand the question, or I think the question's irrelevant. So again, when you're doing the analysis of the report, you basically look at each one of these organizational dimensions, the kind of answers you get, and then you start thinking through what's the implications of what the answers are for this particular dimension. And then flowing from that, you'll develop some recommendations, and this is done, just to emphasize, this is not done sort of totally independently. You're working with a committee of the cooperative, of all of the various stakeholders in the cooperative, and this process in terms of analysis and recommendations is carried out in a dialogue with the cooperative. Another key part of it, just in terms of that analysis, is that we also do demographics. So, you know, we can identify in a large cooperative different divisions, different types of jobs in the cooperative, management, line cooperatives, and again, you can see whether there's dramatically different perceptions, for instance, in communication between what management thinks is going on and what members on the production line think is going on. So again, it really is useful because often within our enterprises, we think our perception is the right perception. By looking at the demographics, we understand there's a whole bunch of people that see this world very differently than what I see it. So that really means we've got some issues here we have to think about and try and transform the cooperative. So that's a very useful aspect of the tool. And then basically recommendations come out of the tool, and just emphasize that you can have recommendations in all of these dimensions or values. And basically what we try and do with the tool is not be prescriptive, but identify these are areas that the cooperative needs to think about. By definition, worker co-ops are owned and managed by their employees. It's not for a consultant on the outside to say what should be done. It's essentially a dialogue with those folks to do it. So going forward, some of the challenges we have at this stage is increasing the use of the tool, training some consultants. It is a complex tool to use and analyze. administer the tool, and we're also adapting the questionnaire for really collective or horizontally managed worker co-ops at one extreme, kind of horizontal and vertical co-ops. And then some of the solutions we're doing is we're networking with the federations of worker co-ops and co-op developers, and we've actually incorporated a cooperative that is managing and licensing the use of the tool. And we'll continue to work in terms of adapting and improving the tool. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for coming this morning. I think I'd like to start with a little bit of a broader overview instead of going right into the details of what the Cooperative Sustainability Scorecard is about. And it's just fantastic that so many people and so many co-ops are actually looking at this area, because what we measure is important in our society. So I think we need to just keep in mind that, yes, from an accounting point of view, traditional business firms and cooperatives, because they've also adopted generally accepted accounting principles, that we do measure certain things on a balance sheet and on an income statement, but it's really an incomplete picture. And it's important to measure those things because financial viability is obviously a cornerstone of sustainability. However, there's a lot more to it than that. And we need to measure the things that are important to us as cooperatives. And then let people know why that's important. And then communicate that to our members, to our broader communities, educate board members. And I think the idea of aggregating that data that Leslie was talking about is actually extremely important, because right now I can tell you in Ontario particularly, but certainly across Canada, we have a very challenging political and regulatory environment for cooperative development and sustainability. We're really being forced down the path. I mean, I was listening to presentations yesterday about degeneration of cooperatives. We're being forced down that path because the benefits of cooperatives are not being measured or recognized. That's a fundamental issue. So let's take the bull by the horns ourselves and measure what's important to us, and then be proud about that and communicate that to people. I think that's a fundamental thing that we need to be looking at.
Bonjour, donc je vais essayer de passer au mode français. Donc je vous invite à mettre vos écouteurs pour ceux qui en ont besoin. Mon nom est Marie Robichaud. Je vais présenter aujourd'hui plus du point de vue du Conseil québécois de la coopération que de celui de la mutualité, plutôt que de celui de la REC développement territorial et coopération. Et je vais tenter de vous amener un peu ailleurs dans la question de la mesure. On va ajouter des raisons de mesurer à la liste que vous nous avez présentée sur le thème. Donc, un autre objet de mesure, je vais tout de suite vous donner les faits saillants de la présentation, comme ça vous allez pouvoir savoir où je m'en vais. Donc, ce qu'on cherche à mesurer, c'est ce qu'on souhaiterait mesurer, c'est la contribution des coopératives aux enjeux de société. Donc, comment les coopératives sont des citoyennes dans leur communauté et comment elles agissent sur les éléments où la société a des changements à apporter. Et pourquoi on souhaite faire ça? C'est connaître l'impact et l'engagement des coopératives dans les enjeux de société, puis les motiver à l'action, donc les motiver à intervenir dans cette société, pas seulement comme une entreprise, mais comme une entreprise citoyenne. Donc, je situe cette question-là de notre place dans la société et notre contribution à la société à partir de la référence qui est notre plan d'ensemble du mouvement coopératif et mutualiste au Québec. Donc, depuis 2007, les coopératives et mutuelles du Québec conduisent ensemble une réflexion stratégique afin d'identifier des enjeux à la fois provenant de la société et à la fois interne au mouvement coopératif. Donc, auquel on choisit de s'attaquer ensemble et de trouver des stratégies, puis on se donne des objectifs communs. Donc, d'où l'intérêt d'éventuellement pouvoir mesurer notre rapport à ces enjeux-là. Donc, on a 3 enjeux de société qui sont identifiés dans notre dernier plan d'ensemble actuellement. Donc, on travaille ensemble à agir sur les changements démographiques. On travaille ensemble à agir en développement durable et en occupation du territoire. En parallèle, on a une autre démarche qui nous amène à soulever d'autres enjeux. Toutefois, ils ne sont pas nécessairement suivis de la même façon, mais je vais quand même vous les souligner. En ce sens, en 2010, la rue de développement territorial et coopération avec des partenaires organisait la conférence internationale « Quel projet de société pour demain ». Donc, on reste dans la réflexion de la contribution des coopératives dans un ensemble de partenaires, un projet de société. Et à ce moment-là, on identifiait encore 5 enjeux de société et 3 enjeux internes. Donc, on situe la place des coopératives dans la société, dans notre réflexion. Quoi mesurer? L'impact des activités mises en œuvre par les coopératives face à ces enjeux. Oui sur la coopérative, oui sur la communauté. Donc, je reste assez vague parce qu'on est encore en train de chercher comment mesurer, j'y arrive. Donc, pourquoi mesurer? Démontrer la contribution, mobiliser le mouvement dans le sens qu'il faut entreprendre davantage d'actions et prendre modèle sur les actions qui ont déjà été mises en œuvre. Donc, le défi, quoi mesurer, comment mesurer. Présentement, on s'attarde davantage à documenter les initiatives et leurs retombées. C'est complexe de dire, OK, comment les coopératives contribuent au changement démographique au Québec. Donc, l'enjeu comme tel n'est pas nécessairement complètement documenté et comment on s'y inscrit non plus.
Une question pour Jessica. Peut-être que tu vas l'aborder dans la prochaine... Peut-être que tu vas l'aborder dans la prochaine session. Il semble que toutes les présentations ont été présentées dans le but de présenter les résultats dans d'autres sessions ultérieures. Tu as parlé de mesurer la participation des membres des caisses populaires en Saskatchewan à l'intérieur des outils que vous avez développés. Plusieurs des coopératives que tu as mentionnées, dont Affinité, sont le résultat de fusion de plusieurs caisses populaires en Saskatchewan. Est-ce que parmi les outils que vous avez développés, vous avez pu avoir quelque chose justement qui a indiqué comment on a favorisé ou pas favorisé la participation?
We will talk about it a little bit more this afternoon, but I can just let you know one of the reasons why we're so excited to have Affinity with us is because they have a relatively unique district. Is that what it is? Linda will talk more about it at our session. She's our Affinity rep, but they have a district governance or district participation governance structure, and the districts correspond often with the former smaller credit unions that merged with Affinity. So we will be able to, some of our questions on the longer questionnaire talk about whether they are able to participate in that district structure and whether that enhances their ability to participate more in the credit union. And so we do have a piece to get into that, and that's also where some of our interviews will get into how you actually participate. But one of the things we want to highlight for Affinity is that unique structure that they have, so that even though they're now a large merged credit union, they're able to keep a lot of that small democratic participation because they've divided their branches and their communities up into these districts where they have their own representation at that level. So I think probably, I don't know, Linda, you want to answer more now or you want to just wait till our session? That was okay? Yeah.
Marie Bouchard. These presentations are all very interesting, and I guess we will all run to the other sessions to hear the conclusions and the content of what you're working on. Unfortunately, I won't be able to visit them because I have another meeting, so I will just have a general question. I think it's very creative to speak of cooperative social responsibility. I think it's quite interesting, even for organizations that are not worker co-ops, to have indicators of total participation management. I think that the CQCM indicators are quite creative and very relevant to the cooperative specificity, the cooperative difference. Because the movement of corporate social responsibility is so strong, because we speak about it a lot more than we speak about cooperatives. And because cooperatives are responsible as citizens in a different way than corporations, and so, in a way better, that their indicators may turn out to be better than CSR indicators. Is there an intention or a movement in the direction of influencing CSR indicators in order to incorporate cooperative indicators, and therefore comparison on a level cooperatives would win?
Well, I'll just make one quick comment, which is the emerging cooperatives, the smaller cooperatives, are absolutely not interested in corporate social responsibility, not even a little bit. And I think the larger co-ops need to listen to them.
Anybody else?
Quand on regarde le référentiel du BNQ 21000 qui est mis de l'avant par le gouvernement du Québec, on constate que dans certains points, notamment toute la question de la gouvernance, les coopératives ont tendance à scorer assez rapidement. Donc, la question est intéressante, à savoir si on amène des indicateurs des coopératives dans la responsabilité sociale ou est-ce qu'on se distingue dans les outils de la responsabilité sociale. Je pense que le débat n'est pas tranché. Je pense qu'il doit y avoir un dialogue entre les deux. Mais c'est une question qui mérite peut-être de réfléchir davantage, certainement.
Oui, bonjour, Guillaume Mebrien. Je suis des coopératives d'habitation. Et comme je vais être dans un des ateliers tout à l'heure, j'aurais aimé savoir s'il était possible que vous me donniez en 2 ou 3 phrases ce que vous retenez comme différence coopérative à travers vos recherches, à travers les indicateurs dont je n'aurai malheureusement pas la chance d'entendre la finesse. Mais qu'est-ce que vous retenez pour dire que je puisse, de façon toute simple, pouvoir ramener aux gens des coopératives dans ma région, dans les différents secteurs, et leur dire, ben, regardez, à travers les recherches et les indicateurs, voici là, ce qui est fortement identifié comme différence pour eux. J'en appelle un peu à chacun des deux.
Thank you for the question, and you know, all this information and the details is going to be available as well, so after the workshop, so that's important. I think that I'm going to speak more because I developed this scorecard so that all cooperatives could use it, small, medium, large, and I'm working mostly as a co-op developer, so I usually deal with startup cooperatives and in the emerging sectors, so local organic food, renewable energy, cooperatives that have already a social justice and ecological motivation in terms of what they want to do with their business, and they're tying the ecology together with you know, social justice as well as the economy and how to make a living in a new world and a new economy. So I think that for the emerging cooperatives, actually the financial or economic indicators are extremely important because they tend to get so involved in their day-to-day that they forget about even doing the basic bookkeeping. So I think, you know, for the smaller cooperatives, the emerging cooperatives, the economic indicators and the processes around that are extremely important, and what's important for them to measure in their organizations. So for the larger co-ops, they're all doing that already, right? In terms of differences in the cooperative difference, I think that the governance and the democratic governance and how that works, the processes that are used, it's not just about the benchmarks, but it's the process that we go through as cooperatives to make the decisions, to determine the benchmarks, to decide what those priorities are for each of our autonomous cooperatives and how that fits into the larger movement and indeed the community or society as a whole. And building democratic capacity in our society is going to be, from my point of view, the single most important thing technologically that we can do, because that is a social technology. It's not about nanotechnology, it's not about renewable energy technology, it's about social technology. How do we organize ourselves as human beings to work together to accomplish these very daunting goals that we have? So I think that is a fundamental difference, and whenever I talk to people and they ask me, well, why would we set up a co-op instead of just a regular company in our startup business? And I always say to them, well, it comes down to one thing. If you want a democratic organization where the democratic principles are actually enshrined in legislation and cooperative principles around the world, if you want to be part of that bigger movement, that's why you would do it as a cooperative. So that is a very significant cooperative difference. I think the other cooperative difference that we don't talk about very much, but I have to give credit to emerging cooperatives, because they have been very much the leaders in ecological restoration. And the larger co-ops, many of them, are very latecomers to that game. And I think what I would like to see personally in terms of dialogue, I would love to see the larger cooperatives help to finance some kind of ongoing annual face-to-face dialogue with emerging cooperatives so that they can learn and support from each other. Because the emerging co-ops need some of the financial and human resources and those kind of good business practices. They need those things. And the larger cooperatives need the innovation and entrepreneurship and ecological targets and innovative ideas and products that the emerging co-ops bring. So I think that could be something, the cooperation amongst cooperatives, that could be very, very different from the corporate sector and corporate social responsibility, because the reality is those corporations very much see themselves as competitors, and they're busy trying to beat each other and eat each other. And I think the cooperatives, from my experience for 30 years, it is incredible to me how, when I travel around the world, how open cooperatives are in sharing their information. And that information is incredibly powerful because, knowledge is power.
Principles are a major guide to the kinds of things that cooperatives need to know about themselves and work out for themselves and communicate. I guess I'm going back a little bit to the other question. One of the things that has happened recently is that the two major grocery chains in Atlantic Canada, other than the cooperatives, are Sobeys and Loblaws. And Walmart has come in quite a big way, and you may be aware that they're expanding their grocery division. Target is coming to us in the fall, I guess they're already somewhere in Canada, but they're targeting fall. All these organizations are doing what they call social reporting, sustainability reporting. They use different words, right? The terminology is, what I find disturbing is we should have been the first. We should have established the grounds on which this language developed. So now we are in a position of having to say, all right, so what are we going to call what we're doing? And what is different? Because the literature is showing us that, quite rightly, the public is aware that corporate responsibility statements, sustainability reports by Shell, what Walmart is telling them, and so on, are in large part image management. And there's a
Session. We have four speakers, but 3 20-minute slots for them, talking about their sustainability scorecard work. The first ones are the group of researchers from Measuring the Co-op Difference Research Network, the sign you see right here.
and they're working with Coop Atlantic on the scorecard. We have Leslie Brown, Andrea Leclerc, Elizabeth Hicks, and Leo Leblanc. 2 people will be talking, which is Elizabeth Hicks and Leo Leblanc. Leo is from the Coop Atlantic organization, and Elizabeth Hicks is from Mount Mason University. And then we have Ras Christensen talking about, from Ontario Cooperative Association, talking about the Cooperative Sustainability Scorecard with Ontario's Natural Food Co-ops. And the last one will be Marie-Paul Robichaud from CECOCN, talking about sustainability engagement tools in Quebec. I will just, before I have Elizabeth come up here, give you a quick heads up. We are going to be launching a social economy book during lunch hour that came out of the social economy Cura in the Atlantic provinces. And I sent the pamphlet around, but the launch will happen during lunch. Thank you.
Morning. So as Sonia just mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit more. You've heard some of you. Oh, yes, thank you. Okay. So some of you were here earlier this morning, and Leslie Brown introduced the scorecard. Right now, myself and Leo Leblanc from Coop Atlantic, we're going to tell you a little bit more about the scorecard and its development, where we are today. Okay, we want to thank our main partners in this process. And so we'll be talking a little bit about the purpose of the tool, looking at the content. I'll give you a short demo of the tool. And then Leo will talk about how we rolled out the tool and how the importance to Coop Atlantic and our next steps. Okay, so in designing this tool, really what we were trying to do is we wanted to get, I think there was talk this morning about the process of preparing the tool. It's not just the results that we're interested in, but the process is really important. So the idea was to engage the various stakeholders in the development of this tool, and so that a co-op could identify and assess its performance on its cooperative difference. It would inform it in terms of doing its planning, strategic planning, ongoing governance, and so forth. And also for them to recognize what is our impact on community and the environment. And we talked a lot about demonstrating transparency and accountability, and of course this is very important for the members and other stakeholders too. And all of this, really, the hope is that this tool will help to foster greater resilience, innovation, sustainability of the co-ops that adopt this tool. The scorecard looks like this. I'm just going to bring it up in a moment and show you, I think maybe I'll do that now. So there's really the scorecard itself, which is this part here, is the main part of it. Along with that comes a couple of surveys, an employee survey, and a member-owner survey as well, and customer survey is included in that. Okay. Okay, the scorecard. We just made a few changes to what I was going to present here on the scorecard, so just bear with me for 1 second. Just to give you an idea of some of the kinds of questions we're asking in the scorecard. Okay. Just to show you a little bit. First of all, there's an area here where we're talking about priorities. That's the first step that the co-op would do, is that they would identify which of these practices are really important to them. And so that way it's very adaptable to each co-op's needs. They would then, there'd be various benchmarks provided. Some of them they would put in their own or might modify the benchmarks as their targets. They'd measure against those targets. These A, B's, and C's would be the indicators, things that would help them measure how well they are achieving that practice or engaging in that practice. So they would measure their results for these indicators. And based on that, they come to a decision as to what their score is. Okay, so how have they done in terms of engaging that practice full-heartedly by the co-op? So that's the process. You'll see some of these principles are in gray. Those are what we call our basic principles. These are the ones that we think that most co-ops should be engaging in these practices. And then we have some in this sort of orange color. Basically, these are referred to as our associative practices that allow the co-op that want to adopt additional practices, they want to get deeper into that area, then these are ones that they might choose to adopt. So I just wanted to bring your attention to a few of these. One was, for example, the co-op has a recruitment process that ensures membership growth. So the first question was just, well, yes or no, they have a process or not. How many new members have they recruited? What is the percentage of sales made to non-members? What is the percentage of inactive members that have become active over the previous year? So those would be a few of the indicators that would help us decide how well we have engaged that particular practice. And if we want to drill down, we would then look at some of these associated practices that go along with that. I'm just going to go down to a couple others. Watch my time here because we just chosen a few and they may take a little longer than we wanted. 6. Here's another one. Compliance with the bylaws. We want to see, okay, our co-op boards complying with the bylaws. They all should be, but are they? And so again, we have a number of indicators to help them decide whether they're complying with that very basic practice as well. We have the co-op board has a code of conduct, so that was felt to be very important. And again, things like the indicators might be, well, how often do they review this code of conduct? Does it include a conflict of interest guidelines? Do board agendas include a call for anyone in conflict of interest in relation to any of the agenda items? So again, these help us understand to what extent their practice of having a code of conduct is really ingrained into the cooperative. 9, we can see under democratic board elections, we have the co-op as the nomination process that ensures enough candidates for the competitive board elections. So again, a number of indicators to indicate whether or not they have, what process they're going through to make sure that they do have enough members. Under strategic planning, under the same co-op principle, we have the co-op board and manager develop a strategic plan. So yes or no, and again we have associated practices, a number of them that go along with that they might choose to adopt as well. Just giving you a sampling of the co-op board actively encourages informal forms of member participation, might be another practice that would be a good one. And again, some of the indicators, the number of members who have participated in strategic planning and policy development over the year, number of employees who have participated, number of members involved in other initiatives outside formal committees and so forth. So again, that would be indicators of that particular practice. And one more here I just want to share. Under Principle 3, member economic participation, we have members participate in the financing of their organization with a significant equity position in the co-op relative to its life cycle. So kinds of things like member equity as a percentage of total assets, percentage of members with fully paid up share capital, percentage increase, decrease in share capital, and whether they encourage their members to fully pay their share capital. So again, some more indicators of that. So that's just a little bit of sampling of some of the principles we have. I guess while I'm here, I'll just also show you a little bit about this is the environment section of the scorecard. And I've put in some false numbers, just numbers here, just to show you how it works. So for example, in this one under the environment, the governance part, we have the co-op as a written environmental policy. We identified that as a high priority. And based on the indicators, we think we're doing pretty well. So we look at the indicators compared to our benchmarks, and we say, you know what, we're going to give ourselves a high score of 5 in that. They're also, because it's a high score of 5, very important to us, we also decided to do both of the associated practices. So it incorporates green procurement policies and objectives. In that case, we haven't given ourselves as high a score of 4 out of 5. We have the co-op has an environmental committee. Again here, based on our measures compared to our benchmarks, we've only given ourselves a 3 out of 5. You'll notice these little, I just want to bring up these little ladybugs. This is something that lets the co-op know that Co-op Atlantic also has a Ladybug Award, and so those particular practices tie into them applying for that Ladybug Award. Okay, once they've done that, the scorecard will automatically take those numbers that we've given ourselves, and will give us a summary score. So just looking down to the environment section, again we have the summary scorecard. You'll see we have a section for the co-op principles, broken down to each principle and some subcategories in those principles. We get a score for just the basic practices. And then we also get a score for basic practices plus any associated practices that we've chosen to adopt. Okay, and that will give us a basic score. If you get 100, it means that, you know what, you've fully engaged in all the basic practices, and those associated practices that you've chosen to adopt. So we get scores for each of those categories, as well as for the co-op principles as a whole. You'll also notice that there's an area to celebrate. Those would be the practices that we identified as high priorities and we did really well in, so it automatically comes up and tells us, okay, this is the areas we're going to celebrate. And then it also tells us the areas that were of a high priority but we scored low in. These are areas that we're going to have to concentrate and improve on for the future. And at the very end, how are we doing? Okay. At the very end of the scorecard, you'll see there's also a summary total. So in this particular case, I did very few of the practices, and maybe that's what the particular co-op wants to do to start with. So I got only a 26 out of 250 for 10.4% on the basic. And with the basic and associated that I chose to do, I ended up with an 18.6%. So that's okay too, because a co-op might decide to only do a little bit to start with, but they can then compare it as they start to use more and more of the scorecard that would like to see that percentage grow over time, and also would allow the co-op to compare itself with other co-ops in the group, because we'll amalgamate that information. So I can skip over these rather quickly because I took you right to the scorecard. So just to show you that there are the 4 themes in the scorecard. This is our total package, the scorecard being the major part. And we have the 4 themes, the triple bottom line, economic, social, environment, as well as 7 co-op principles in there. And so we think that including the co-op principles is rather, not all tools include that for co-ops. We thought it was really important to set those out as well. Oh, I'm not in the full screen here, but. F5.
Well, F5, you're going to start at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Well, then you can go fast. Just go F5.
Oh, okay. Go F5? Okay.
Yeah, and go fast on the arrow.
And go back.
Just
Okay.
go back and do it.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so then we looked at the summary scorecards and the fact that it does break it down by theme, by category, within those themes and the whole, and identified the areas to celebrate and improve. It's a very flexible tool that we have here, so that's the idea too, that the co-op, I guess I might go over. The co-op can choose to do any part of the tool. They can choose to do one theme if they want. They can choose to do all the themes and maybe all the basic practices. Or they can choose any combination of practices within this so that it meets their particular needs. And I'm just going to turn it over to Leo at this point.
I got a few comments that are not in the presentation. I think that's okay. When I first started thinking about this whole process, it got inspired by an article that Russ had written in an article somewhere, and he had focused on the financial side and on the environmental side. So we've been going through a change in CEO. And we had a person that was very businesslike for a period of time and changed the organization radically. It changed especially our retail area managers and the work that they were doing with our boards, with our various stores, because some of our stores have management agreements, so we have area managers that go out and try to help. And they were focusing on operations, and they weren't focusing on governance. So when I saw Russ's article, I went back to my staff and I said, this is really, really good. Now, how can we do that in other areas to reinforce the cooperative side, the governance side, the principles, the values, and how we actually roll out our governance? So it wasn't easy because these people taught that they had the best model in place. They do it like the Sobeys and the Loblaws and our competition do it. And worry about operations because operations need attention. So it was a real chore to go back and say, no, we're going to dismantle things, we're going to do things differently, and we're going to get our cooperatives to participate in putting this together. So we went out and we got our cooperatives to actually look at the practices that we had put together and change them to the way that they would like them applied. So then we developed our model. We had to go back, get management's approval, get the area managers together, get every section of the organization, get the board of Co-op Atlantic, get the executive management to agree to it, and then it was okay to roll it out. But it wasn't an easy process. Some of the benefits, we want to be best practices in cooperative management is what we're trying to do. And then there's these other benefits that come from it. So help co-ops compete with the big chains, help the board of a new co-op become familiar with the co-op model, help co-ops self-evaluate and take action on some of the things that need to change, identify areas where attention is needed, identify areas to improve, create awareness on how co-op is different, engage the board, and enhance the ability to work as a team and work with the membership as well. And then a practical tool for showing meaningful results and comparing results. We have cooperatives that do a very, very good job in the areas of cooperative management, cooperative governance, and they can teach others. And this tool will demonstrate the strength that they have in rolling out these various principles and the values that we have in cooperation, and also the financial side and the economic and the financial, economic, social, and environmental side. So the tool, it needed to be user-friendly. People needed to have the time required to do the tool, so we decided we would chunk it up in little pieces and they could do parts of it at various meetings that they had. And we need to have manager buy-in or it's not going to work, so we spent a lot of time working with the managers, showing this at some of their conferences so they could get used to it and understand it wasn't threatening to them, it was just a different way, and we needed to deal with governance, the governance side. And we needed to find a way to encourage co-ops to participate. And certainly we needed support and resources. We needed support from the organization, and we needed support, resources to make sure that happens, and then reaching out with surveys of staff and surveys from the owner members to give feedback to the organization on how well we're doing in each of these areas. So we got some very good comments from the participants. Can't wait to see this tool in progress. A very good, very logical program, easy to use. So we spent a lot of time working in the various regions so that people would be familiar and using it. Now we brought them all to Moncton and had some workshops with them for a full day. So what's next? Well, we need to roll this out to our co-ops. We got to make them use the tool. We got to finalize the surveys and roll those out. Make sure that there's a good instruction guide so that it's user-friendly and they can work their way through it themselves. And also have people available to them if they've got some questions. And so investigate how we can share information and then see if these are really meaningful to good results, because some of our co-ops that have good results have all these things in practice. So it is going to be revealing. So for more information, we have a host of people that work with us, researchers that I want to thank, Leslie Brown, Elizabeth Hicks and Andre Leclerc, which were the main people that worked with us. They worked for 2 years tirelessly, and we had a lot of changes that had to be made. They were very patient, and we're now working on an internet application that is going to be simple to use and collate and manage our results. Thank you.
Measure, as well as the processes. Like, what are the different, decision-making, governance processes, etc., that you're going through that are recognized, as they were saying at Co-op Atlantic, as best practices or good practices to follow. and sharing those with other co-ops. So the economic measures, this just summarizes, we'll go down to look at the different aspects of the scorecard, but this summarizes how many of the recommended practices, for example, they're doing. And I wanted to give people in each area just a simple percentage. People understand percentages, right? Because we all grow up going to school and learning what percentages are and how well you're doing. So it's kind of a report card in that way. But I wanted to kind of summarize the whole thing in just a few numbers so that people can say, well, how are we doing on that? So I know if people in the earlier presentation this morning, Peter Huff was showing their bar graphs. That's another way to express it. But it's just easy to understand. So for this particular example, 62%. So that's okay, right? I mean, they're not failing, but they could do better. And then the idea is to, I really love that idea, and I would add it to my scorecard. That idea of celebrating the things they're doing well, that's a fantastic idea. I think you should add that to the, if you end up using the scorecard. But I also wanted to identify, okay, well, what areas do we want to improve on? You can pick one, or you can pick two, or maybe you're already really good in that area, so go to another area and pick one or two things. There's always room for improvement. The social measures, again, we'll get in, I'll show you and drill down to show you what those look like. So I've got this formatted so that people can just print it on double-sided, and that's why there's the title here again. And then the environmental measures. So for this particular example, you can see the scores are all, in the early 60s, which is sort of, okay, well, you're doing okay, at least you're doing something, right? And you can do better. So let's look at the economic. So here's sort of minimum recommended practices. And again, for emerging co-ops, a lot of them don't even know this stuff, right? Because maybe they've never run a business before. They don't have an accountant who's working with them. Hopefully they do have a bookkeeper. I mean, it's surprising when you see how many even emerging co-ops, startup co-ops don't even have a bookkeeper that's doing things properly. So, there's some real basics around the economic or financial stuff that needs to be done. Like lots of small businesses, they may not have a budget for the year. So all those kinds of things, just they need to focus on some of those practices. And then this is all about financial literacy. So teaching people in the cooperatives what's a financial ratio? What's a current ratio? I mean, who cares what the percentage of staff cost is, a percentage of total sales is? Well, these are all benchmarks in the industry that are used. And one of the great things that Co-op Works, I think it's called Co-op Works, still in the United States, they have aggregated data for all the food co-ops across the United States. Co-op metrics, right? That's what it's called. And, as they add more to it, they can slice it by size of cooperative, so you can get some benchmarks for financial performance that then you could put in this scorecard based on the size of your co-op. Because those co-ops are going to be very similar to how they're operating in Canada too. We don't have a tool like that in Canada. We have Stats Canada small business profiles, which, I mean, some of them are okay, but most of them they're not accurate enough.
And I think these are amazing examples of our action research in the cooperative community. So very, very informative and for me anyway. One question is, these are incredible tools for cooperatives to develop their own business strategies and cooperative advantage. How can these tools be used for communicating the cooperative advantage to policymakers? And is it used that way?
I guess once you've completed this particular exercise, you would have all the information you need to develop a corporate social responsibility report. And when your federation and you do the aggregate for all your members, that is a powerful tool to bring to your government and say, here's what we're doing together.
Yeah, I think it's the aggregation that's really important. So the challenge is to get the cooperatives to actually do it, right? And then to do it consistently over years and to continue to show progress, because they have to show the commitment to actually this triple bottom line. And we have to try and measure that, then aggregate it, and then take it to the policy, government lobby, etc., to hopefully influence practices and regulations that will be favorable towards cooperatives. Because I can tell you in Ontario, because that's mostly where I work, we have, I would say we suffer from like neglect. The cooperative sector suffers from neglect from the provincial government. They support lots of private business development, etc., but they really do very little, if anything, for cooperatives. And what they always say to us is, well, you can access those existing programs as a cooperative just like any other business, but it's not really that simple. And in fact, because cooperatives do bring a lot more to the table in terms of societal benefits, there should be special support for that.
Je crois que le contexte québécois est particulier, étant donné qu'on a plusieurs fédérations sectorielles et on a aussi une direction des coopératives très forte qui nous appuie aussi en développement durable. Donc, on a...
Je suis aussi président de la Fédération des coopératives funéraires du Québec. Et comme Marie-Paul a mentionné, notre fédération a été un des leaders au Québec dans
I appreciated very much the progress which we have made together and the way you explained it to us. It's quite uplifting and enlightening. But I came from a session where we talked about how to differentiate cooperative social responsibility from corporate social responsibility. And I challenge us all to think about how to differentiate Walmart's sustainable development from the co-op movement's sustainable development. And I think what distinguishes it partly would be the depth and the breadth of the undertaking, the intensity of the undertaking, the integrated nature of the undertaking, the linking of a triple top line. Even the gurus of management are talking about triple top rather than triple bottom line, some of the beginning in the strategic plan. But it seems to me also, I will realize the difference, or I'll recognize the difference, when I hear co-ops talking about decisions to stop making certain things, to stop producing certain things, to stop selling certain things. Because no matter how carefully and cleanly and efficiently we make them and move them and sell them, they probably don't belong in the inventory. They probably don't belong in the mix. There are some fundamental ecological contradictions, and they certainly aren't consistent with sustainable consumption as well as sustainable production. And I think that one of the ways co-ops will distinguish themselves, this is the finishing idea, it's a question, but it's a comment with a question wrapped around it. I'm wondering whether really what will distinguish co-ops is their devotion to creating knowledgeable consumers, to make real choices, and knowledgeable frontline workers, and knowledgeable managers, and so on, who will be able to develop that knowledge and have the kind of frameworks which allow them to ask the right critical questions. Because it's an old slogan that I still remember, that the worst pollution of all is bad ideas. And many of us go at building a house or figuring out how to clothe ourselves or to eat or transport with a slew of ideas which are, at best, they represent a certain de-skilling, a very big gap between what we know and what we need to know to make good choices. And I think this is what co-ops can do much more than corporations, because fundamentally they're not about selling us more stuff. Question?
Yeah. I guess if we measure the economic, the social, and ecological results that we obtain in our organizations, it's the first step. And other organizations are already doing it, and some of them are doing it very well. And we have to decide for ourselves what we want to do in those three major areas. But there's one thing, one particular area that other organizations don't have, and it's this whole focus on our principles and on our values. And you've picked up on one principle, which is education. We need to educate our leaders, our managers, our staff, and our members. And they will make the decisions, the right decisions, if we provide them with the appropriate information and educate them on how important these decisions are for them and the community, and it's always important that they are the ones that are in control and they make those decisions. And that's why we focused on the principles and the values, and these principles.
Everybody's going to know about it very quickly and not be supportive of this industry moving forward. So it's a very integrated system into the community, and I think that was one of the aspects of the strategic environmental assessment, the socioeconomic aspect of it. It was never fully addressed ever through the roundtables or through any of the dialogue we heard. Basically, the people in Parsbo think it's great because there's going to be all these jobs, which I think they'll find is not going to be the case, that they'll have a cable. Once it's all said and done, they'll have a cable put up to the grid and that'll be the end of it. But down at the other end of the province in Digby Neck, they're going about it in a really productive, environmentally sensitive way. However, that said, my cautionary thing is that their Digby Gut operation is 1.95 megawatts, which is 0.05 megawatts below what triggers an environmental assessment. So I think the people need to be aware of that. Are they trying to save money by not having an environmental assessment? Do they feel that they won't make it through an environmental assessment? I've communicated with the president of the company and he says, well, it's just a coincidence. He's a good guy. I'm going to go with that for the moment, that it's just a coincidence that it's 0.05 below the amount that triggers an environmental assessment. But I do have my suspicions, as you can probably tell by the tone of my voice. But I think that it's too important, of a development to screw around with trying to make a lot of money from, and that be the only thing that comes from it. I think it's really important to your future, to my grandchildren's grandchildren's future, to make sure that these things, when they go in, are safe, sustainable, and will benefit the community, and the community of Nova Scotia or the community of whatever town it's around. So that's what I am sticking with this for, is to make sure that this is a long-term sustainable program that isn't harmful to the environment. And I don't believe that industry is looking at it that way. And I could get into that with the political, socio-political aspects of it, and the way that this government has been tramping around the world through environmental conferences trying to raise investment in Nova Scotia when they knew full well that the turbine that was in the bay that winter was kaput, and they couldn't, if they told anybody about it, it wouldn't be very smart to go to Copenhagen and try to develop funding. Okay, I'm getting